In May 2019, a jury in the Whatcom County Superior Court in Washington State found Tim Bass guilty of first-degree murder. On July 2nd of that same year, the judge sentenced Tim Bass to nearly 27 years in prison, the maximum sentence allowed under Washington state law after it abolished the death penalty in 2018. After the sentence was read, Tim Bass said, "I am 100% innocent. I don't hold any ill will toward anyone, but I feel very bad about this." For Mandy's family, after 30 long years of waiting, there was finally a resolution. On December 12, 2017, on the 81st birthday of Mandy's mother, Mandy Stavik, Whatcom County Sheriff Bill Elfo paid her a visit and told her that the killer had been caught. Mary had already lost both a son and a daughter. Her life had been full of misfortune. At that moment, she felt it was the best birthday gift she had ever received. Mandy could finally rest in peace. The main character of this story is Mandy Stavik. In 1989, she was 18 years old. She was a cheerful girl who loved sports, especially running. In high school, Mandy joined both the basketball team and the track team. In 1989, she graduated from Mount Baker High School and, with excellent grades, was admitted to Central Washington University. She had a bright future ahead of her. Mandy's home was in Acme, a small town in Whatcom County, Washington. It was a sparsely populated area with fewer than 300 permanent residents, most of whom made a living through farming. The Stavik family hadn't always lived in Acme. 5 years earlier, Mandy's parents had divorced, and her mother Mary had moved the family, Mandy, her older sister Molly, and her younger brother Lee, from Alaska to Washington. Their house sat at the end of a road, backed by a forest, in a very quiet setting. Mandy also had an older brother named Brent. In 1975, when Brent was 17, he was shot and killed while hunting in Palmer, Alaska. Perhaps because of that tragedy, Mary wanted to leave the place that held so much pain, so she moved the family to Acme. They quickly adapted to their new life. But no one could have predicted that this already unfortunate family would face yet another disaster. November 24th, 1989, the day after Thanksgiving. Because it was a holiday, Mandy had returned home from Central Washington University. After lunch, she decided to go for a run, one of her favorite activities. Usually at this time, her mother Mary would ride her bicycle behind Mandy and accompany her. But that day, her mother didn't go, and Mandy went running alone. At around 2:30 in the afternoon, Mandy left the house. She wore a light-colored sweatshirt, green sweatpants, and blue sneakers, and she had her German Shepherd, Kyra, on a leash. She listened to music as she ran along the town's roads. Time passed, and Mandy had reached the end of the road and started heading back. But no one expected that, just a few hundred meters from home, Mandy would disappear. It was now 4:30 in the afternoon. 2 hours had passed since Mandy left. But Mandy still hadn't returned. Usually by this time, Mandy would have been back long ago. Her mother found it odd and began to worry. Then, the German Shepherd Kyra came home alone. As soon as she got inside, she acted strangely and hid away. But Mandy was still nowhere to be seen. Mary felt something was wrong, so she immediately called Mandy's boyfriend, Rick Zender, to ask if he had seen Mandy. Rick said Mandy wasn't with him and that he hadn't seen her at all that day. Mary couldn't sit still any longer. She called the police, then rushed out the door to look for her daughter. She followed the route Mandy usually ran, calling out her name loudly. When the townspeople heard what had happened, they all joined the search. Almost the entire town knew that Mandy was missing. Some people got on horses and went into the forest where cars couldn't go. The police also sent helicopters to help with the search from the air, and they brought in professional tracking dogs to search near the Stavik home. They also went door to door in the town, asking if anyone had seen Mandy. But after a full day of searching, Mandy was still not found. The police went to Mandy's house and tried to get the German Shepherd Kyra, the dog that had been running with Mandy, to help them find clues. They thought Kyra might know where Mandy had last been. Strangely, ever since she came home that day, Kyra had been extremely timid and refused to go out at all. The police suspected that Kyra might have been frightened by something. On November 26th, The third day after Mandy's disappearance, the search continued. Around noon, search teams found a pair of green sweatpants in the forest. The police asked Mary to identify whether they belonged to Mandy. Mary looked closely. They resembled the pants Mandy had worn that day, but she eventually concluded they were not Mandy's. The pants were sent to a lab for testing, and results showed they had nothing to do with Mandy. On November 27th, the fourth day after Mandy's disappearance, two search team members took a rescue boat along the Nooksack River. At a junction in the river, they spotted something floating nearby. They went closer and found Mandy. She was floating in the water, naked except for her socks and sneakers. She showed no signs of life. No other foreign objects were found near her. When Mary received the news, she was overwhelmed with grief. Because Mandy was found in the river, the police could not immediately determine whether it was a drowning or a homicide. A day later, the autopsy report came out. The cause of death was drowning and asphyxiation. There were also signs of sexual assault. The police learned that Mandy had been a strong swimmer during school and had even worked part-time as a lifeguard. Moreover, the water where she was found was only about as deep as a young person's calf, far too shallow for an accidental drowning. The coroner also found a hematoma on Mandy's head, suggesting she may have been knocked unconscious by a blow to the head. There were also many scratches on her thighs and arms, which were believed to have been caused by passing through brush. So the police concluded that Mandy was attacked by her killer while running that day and was injured and knocked unconscious. The killer then carried Mandy through a brushy area and threw her into the river. The police believed that Mandy was likely unconscious or unable to save herself at that point, and she drowned shortly after entering the water. In the 1980s, DNA testing technology was still in its infancy, and only a very few places could perform such tests. Fortunately, the detective in charge of this case successfully extracted a man's DNA from Mandy's body. The police began an in-depth investigation based on this lead. The first person the police looked into was Mandy's boyfriend, Rick Zender. Mandy and Rick had been together for more than 3 years. During that time, they had had multiple arguments, and it seemed that their relationship had been having some issues lately. The police contacted Rick, and he was very cooperative. He was devastated upon learning of Mandy's death. He said that although he and Mandy had had their differences, they were just normal couple problems, and there was no deep hatred. On the day Mandy disappeared, Rick had an alibi. The police collected Rick's DNA sample, and the results showed that the DNA found on Mandy did not belong to him. Eventually, the police ruled Rick out as a suspect. As time went on, the case lost momentum. The police had the killer's DNA, but at that time, DNA testing capabilities were limited, and there was no DNA database. Unless there was evidence or the person willingly provided a sample, the police had no authority to force anyone to give their DNA. Mary kept giving interviews to the media, hoping to keep the case in the public eye and find the killer. The townspeople also organized fundraisers, and all the money raised was offered as a reward for anyone who could provide useful information. Mandy's memorial service received extensive media coverage. Her boyfriend Rick also attended that day. He stood in front of Mandy's grave, holding a teddy bear, Mandy's favorite stuffed animal. Although the police had the killer's DNA, without other evidence, they couldn't narrow down the list of suspects. The case quickly became a cold case. Fast forward to 2009, 20 years after Mandy's murder. The killer still hadn't been found. A detective named Kevin Bohe took over the case. He was the third detective assigned to it. He was very interested in this case from 20 years earlier and tried to crack it. Under his leadership, the case was reopened. After listening carefully to Mary's detailed account of what happened, Kevin Bohe noticed some points that may have been overlooked. He believed that even though the town was small, that didn't mean the residents should be ruled out as suspects. He thought of a case in England where a woman was killed in a village. Because the population was small, the police did DNA testing on everyone in the area and eventually found the killer. With that idea in mind, Kevin Bohe went back to the station and made a list of everyone who had lived in the town at the time. He visited them one by one and asked for DNA samples. Some residents agreed, others didn't. After visiting more than 100 people, Kevin Bohe still hadn't found any useful leads. In June 2013, two mothers from Bellingham, Washington, Heather and Mary, took their children out to play together. During their conversation, they happened to mention the old case from Acme. They both lived not far from where Mandy's family had lived, so they knew the case well. During the talk, both of them unexpectedly mentioned the same person, a man named Tim Bass. They said that Tim Bass had harassed each of them at some point. He had lived near Mandy's home back then. Was it just a coincidence that two people having a casual conversation both mentioned the same man? The more they thought about it, the more suspicious it seemed. They felt this clue might help the case, so they called the police. After receiving the report, the police looked into the lead. They reviewed the old case files and found that Tim Bass had never provided a DNA sample. They also discovered that his home at the time was located right along the route where Mandy had been running when she disappeared. According to the investigation, in January 1990, 2 months after Mandy's murder, Tim Bass married his then-girlfriend Gina Malone and moved out of Acme to Everson, Washington. Tim and Gina had 3 children, and he worked as a truck driver. After gathering this information, the police decided to meet Tim Bass in person. Investigators went to his current home. To their surprise, Tim Bass said he didn't remember Mandy. This unusual response raised strong suspicion among the investigators. Everyone in town knew about Mandy's case. It was big news. Tim's house at the time was very close to Mandy's, and Mandy would have passed by it every time she ran. The investigators directly asked if he would voluntarily provide a DNA sample, and Tim refused. He said he didn't trust the police. This behavior made the police feel that they might finally be getting closer to solving the case. But they now faced a new challenge. Without any evidence, they couldn't force Tim Bass to give his DNA. Any evidence obtained illegally would also be thrown out in court. Tim Bass worked as a driver for a bakery called Franz Bakery. The police contacted the bakery's female manager, Kim Wagner, and told her they were investigating one of her employees. They asked if she could provide the driver's route so they could surveil the suspect and collect anything that might contain his DNA. After hearing this, Kim felt that it might be an invasion of privacy, so she refused. But later, something happened that changed her mind. In 2015, 26 years after Mandy's murder and 2 years after the police had first identified Tim Bass as a person of interest, Kim happened to learn more about the case during a conversation with a friend. She changed her mind. One day, Kim was at a bar with a friend, and the friend casually mentioned Mandy's case. He said that one of his company's employees, Tim Bass, used to live in the same area as Mandy, and that Tim's house was right on the road where Mandy was last seen running. That was when Kim realized that the person the police had come to her about 2 years earlier was Tim Bass. She started paying closer attention to him. She noticed that Tim always took his work trash home with him, as if he was being very careful. In 2017, when the police came to Kim's office again, she voluntarily gave them Tim's delivery route and fully cooperated with the investigation. After getting the route, the police began to track Tim Bass. He was very cautious. He didn't smoke or drink. He always wore gloves while driving, and he took all his car trash home to dispose of it. The police had no chance to get his DNA. At that point, Kim offered to help. She said, "I'm a mother now, too. If something like this happened to my daughter, I would hope someone would help me. I understand how a mother feels. If I can help with this case, I'll do everything I can." From then on, Kim began watching Tim Bass closely. August 10th, 2017 was a crucial day. Kim saw Tim Bass get a disposable cup from the water cooler and drink some water. After he finished, he threw the cup straight into the trash can. As soon as Tim left, Kim went over, picked the cup out of the trash, and hid it in her drawer. She immediately notified the police. The police came to the bakery, took the cup, and sent it to the lab for DNA testing. A few days later, the DNA results came back. The report showed that the DNA found on Mandy's body was a perfect match for Tim Bass. At last, the person who had killed Mandy all those years ago had been identified. In December 2017, Tim Bass was arrested on charges of first-degree murder. During the interrogation, he remained unusually calm. When he learned that the police had obtained his DNA, he denied being Mandy's killer. He claimed that he had met Mandy by chance one time, and they had gradually become secret lovers. He said that on the day before Mandy's murder, After she came home from school, they had been together, which was why his DNA was on her body. In May 2019, the Mandy case went to trial. In court, Tim Bass pleaded not guilty and insisted he was innocent. He said that on the day of the murder, he had been with his wife all day, and she could provide an alibi. But that claim was quickly refuted by a witness in court, and that witness was his ex-wife, Gina Malone. She testified that she hadn't seen Tim at all that day. She also added that in 2017, when the police came to their home, Tim had asked her to provide a false alibi. He had told her to say she saw Mandy running that day, but in reality, she hadn't been there. Gina said she decided to testify against her husband because he had been physically violent toward her and their children on multiple occasions, and she could no longer tolerate it. Another witness was Tim's brother Tom. Tom said that when investigators asked him for a DNA sample, Tim got really nervous. Why? Because brothers share a lot of DNA. If they tested Tom's, they'd know the killer was a relative. Tom also said Tim asked him to lie in court and say he'd also had a secret thing with Mandy to make her look like a loose person. But Tom said Mandy was just a friend, and he refused to lie. With all that evidence, the jury didn't take long. They found Tim Bass guilty of first-degree murder and gave him almost 27 years. Mandy Stavik, just 18 years old, attacked only a few hundred feet from home while out for a run. Her case sat unsolved for nearly 30 years. But with a lot of people helping out, the guy was finally brought to justice. Her story finally got an ending.